see if it's working. It's working. Very nice. Hello, welcome to Shmirchik, Veterans Corner, where you'll experience all the unpleasantness that comes with me. So, we're up to part 19. We had to do this in lots of parts because what happened is that I just couldn't get around to it, you know. So, I hope to get through this. Almost done. Almost finished, right? So, Stalin and the Jews, the Red Book. There are many people who want to do revisionist history, and they like to also pretend like... not dashboard, what am I doing? They like to pretend that Stalin was a friend of the Jews, and meanwhile, that's not the case. The guy was a monster. He was literally a psychopath. I don't know if he was a psychopath necessarily, but he was definitely a monster. Some sort of monster. Psychopath. Where am I? Okay. I don't know if he was... System works and the rumble. Very good. Here, let's see. Yeah, system works. So, we ended off last time reading all the biographies of the people that were involved in the press, the Jewish press in Russia, and the Jewish people who were in the anti-fascist committee, and the Jewish people who were picked on for being in any way involved with the government, and other Jews as well, and tortured and sent to the gulag and sent to exile, right? So we're up to these names. We have a few pages left, so we'll try to get through it. So Moshe Altshuler lived from 1887 to 1969. He was a journalist. He wrote articles in Yiddish and Russian. These are people that lived in the time of Stalin and either survived him or got killed by him. Pavel Antokolsky, in 1896, St. Petersburg, to 1978, Moscow, poet and translator, studied law at the University of Moscow. His first poems were published in 1921 until 1934. He worked as a producer at the Vashtangov Theater in Moscow. He was a war correspondent and led a frontline theater. His verse narrative, The Sun, published in 1943, is one of the most important works of Soviet war poetry. In the poems, The Extermination Camp and the Uprising in Sobibor, together with V. Kaverin, written in 1945. He describes the extermination and the resistance of the Jews in 1946. He wrote the poem No Eternal Memory. So I think this is about the people who were editors of the Black Book, which is recording the atrocities of the Nazis. And they also got persecuted by Stalin, I think. Bagram Apresian was a frontline correspondent during the war. The author and essayist collected material about the Treblinka death camp. His report about the tragedy of the Jewish children in this camp, the children of the Black Way, was incorporated into the Black Book. El Basarov worked on the Black Book. Abraham Derman, from 1880 to 1952, literary scholar and author, wrote several works about Chekhov, Korolenko, and other authors. Abraham Efros. So I think it's also describing their works, besides for the Black Book, what they were editors, and also they were probably writers, generally. Abraham Efros, who lived from 1888 to 1954, was a translator, literary and theater critic, and assistant professor of the theory of drama. Shachna Epstein, we saw his biography earlier in other streams. He was something. I think he might have got killed by Stalin. Itzik Pfeiffer, also we spoke about. Reuven Freierman, from 1891 to 1972 in Moscow, studied at the Technical University in Kharkov, and worked first in various jobs and later as a journalist. He wrote narratives primarily for children. His first literary works were published in 1924. In 1941, he joined the ranks of the public military. During the war, he was a frontline correspondent for army newspapers. The Second World War, right? Valeria Gerasimova, from 1903 to 1970, author and literary critic. She studied until 1925 at the Educational College of the University of Moscow and was later a teacher and active in the Komsomol. Her narratives and novellas began to appear in 1923. During the war, she worked as a frontline correspondent. So she was born probably in Saratov, and she died in Moscow probably, right? Leib Goldberg, who lived from 1895 to 1955, 1892 to 1955, was a Yiddish author. He translated the works of Shalom Aleichem into Russian and wrote for the newspaper Einigkeit. So here's all the list of the people that were writers and, right? Meir Yellen, born in 1910, wrote a prose in Yiddish and Latvian. He lived during the war in the ghettos of Kovno, where he took an active part in the Jewish resistance movement and kept a ghetto chronicle. He emigrated to Israel in 1973. Yaakov Yasadi, born in 1911, Latvian author and dramatist. He fought as a volunteer in the 16th Latvian Division and wrote for frontline newspapers. Right, so it's just lists of people that lived and wrote the in the Black Book. So we're gonna read all of them because I think it's important, right? And for their memory to stay alive, regardless of whether it's boring or whatnot, right? So, right? Yefim Hechtman, journalist and captain during the war, worked as a frontline correspondent for the army newspaper Krasnaya Zvezda. Leib Goldberg, from 1892 to 1955, Yiddish author. He translated the works of Shalom Aleichem into Russian and wrote for the newspaper Einigkeit. Vera Enbar, who lived from 1890, born in Odessa, and died probably in 1972, Leningrad, was a poet, author, and journalist. She studied in Odessa and Paris, where her first book of poems was published in 1914. In 1941, she went to Leningrad and lived in the besieged city until 1944. She describes her experience during the siege in the book of poems, The Meridian Polkovsky Meridian, and in the Leningrad diary, nearly 3 years, Pochi 3 Goda. Right. Meir Yellen, born in 1910, wrote prose in Yiddish and Latvian. He lived during the war in the ghetto of Kovno, where he took an active part in the Jewish resistance movements and kept a ghetto chronicle. We just said about him. Yaakov Yosed, born in 1911, Latvian author and dramatist. He fought as volunteer in the 16th Latvian Division and wrote for frontline newspapers. Benjamin Silber, from 1902 to 1989, Moscow, author, studied in Arabic in Moscow and St. Petersburg and did his doctorate in Russian philology. He was a war correspondent with the press agency TASS and Izvestia. His book, Two Captains, Dva Kapitana, appeared in 1947, in which he described the battles and the sailor's death of the submarine captain and hero of the Soviet Union, Israel Fisanovich. Together with Pavel Antolkovsky, he wrote a book about the uprising in Sobibor and about the Jewish resistance. Kavarin was a member of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. Rachel Kovnater worked as a journalist at the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee and wrote for the newspaper Einigkeit. In 1943, MS published her biography about the hero of the Soviet Union, Joseph Makovsky, who was seriously wounded several times as lieutenant colonel of the Armored Corporations in 1943. Then there was Leib Kvitko. Then there was Vladimir Lidin V. Gomberg from 1894 to 1979. He studied the Middle East and law and wrote novels and narrations after 1916. He was a frontline correspondent for Izvestia and for army newspapers during the war. Bernard Beryl Mark from Lomza, who lived from 1908 to 1966 in Warsaw and died in Warsaw, probably Poland. Because it says here, it says Lomza and then Warsaw, it says the dates. So I'm assuming that's when he was born and that's when he died. Right. He was a Jewish-Polish historian, literary critic, and journalist. He edited articles in the Jewish press and the 2-volume History of Social Movements in Poland in Yiddish 1932, and 1939. He lived in the Soviet Union during the war, collaborated with the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee and the Union of Polish Patriots in the USSR. In 1944, he wrote the standard work on the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, Powstanie w Getchi Wars Zauskim, which came out in several editions and many languages. In Moscow from 1947 until his death, Mark was director of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. He published many historical books, including the Ungekommene Schreibers von Ghettos on Lagern und sehr Werk, and edited the magazines, newsletter of the JHI, Blätter für Geschichte, and Bulletin Z. Then there was Solomon Mikhils, who was murdered by Stalin, and then there was Georgy Mundblit. He was an author, critic, and screenwriter. During the war, he worked as a journalist. Hirsch Osherovich, born in 1908 and wrote in Yiddish. He was a correspondent for the newspaper Einigkeit and wrote several publications about the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. After the liquidation of the committee, he was arrested in 1949 and released in 1956. He emigrated to Israel in 1971. Lev Osserov, Lev Goldberg, from 1914, Kiev, to 1996, Moscow, studied Russian and Ukrainian philology in Kiev and history, philosophy, literature, Latin, and Greek in Moscow. After 1934, he specialized in Russian literature of the 19th and 20th centuries and was also active as a poet, translator, and critic. During the war, he was a correspondent for an army newspaper. He was the first to describe the tragedy of Babi Yar based on eyewitness testimony. His report was selected as the opening article of the Black Book, but abridged to half by the censors and published in its entirety for the first time in the German version by this author. His poem Babi Yar was published in 1946, and a collection of his poetry, Lyrica, from 1931 to 1966 in Moscow in 1966. Osserov died shortly after a visit to Paris, where the French edition of the Black Book was presented. So I think that one day we're going to go and read the Black Book in its full version, because they used the Black Book for as evidence and witness testimony for the Nuremberg trials, right? So, hi John, how are ya? Yeah. Ovadia Savage, who lived from 1896 in Warsaw, Poland, right? And he died probably in Moscow in 1967, studied law in Moscow as a TASS correspondent. He took part in the Spanish Civil War and wrote immediately after his return to Moscow. In 1938, the book People of the International Brigades, Liudi International Nike Brigade. The poet and journalist was a close friend of Ilya Ehrenberg during the Second World War. He worked as a frontline correspondent. So it's interesting to me because, like, as I mentioned in my other video, I'm reading the book of Ariel Sharon, and he mentions about the Spanish Civil War, how while he was fighting the Yom Kippur War, he felt as if the same thing that was happening in the Spanish Civil War was happening to the Jews in Israel, because one of the reasons why, according to Ariel Sharon, the Spanish Civil War, whatever, was lost, and I don't know what happened there, but he says the reason why they lost, or somebody lost in the Spanish Civil War, was because there was a lot of infighting and for power. And so that was something that was happening in Israel during the Yom Kippur War, right? And it's crazy because he describes in the book how, because there were people in the politics, in the power, they weren't on the ground, and they refused to come on the ground to check out what was happening on the front lines, right? When Israel was fighting Egypt, and they were giving orders from their posts in the government, in their offices, and Ariel Sharon kept begging them, like, stop giving me orders. I know what's happening here. You can't give me orders because that's going to be, like, suicidal for us, right? And then, in the end, after everything was said and done, and after there were soldiers, a lot of casualties, and after Ariel Sharon, he actually had to disobey orders at some point because they were sending him into suicidal missions because they were not on the front. They didn't see what was happening, and they're sending orders from their desks. So, and then after, like, Moshe Dayan and this guy named Bar-Lev came to admonish Ariel Sharon about what he did wrong in the war, while they're still collecting the dead and taking away the wounded, he said that he had to hold himself back from whacking them in the face. After they come to criticize him, they come in their new clothing and their pressed outfits, and he's coming off the battlefield with like a thing wrapped around his head because he got injured, and he felt like smacking and whacking them in the face with their attitude, you know, after he just witnessed the worst carnage he'd ever witnessed in his life of soldiers dying and the bloodbath, right? That was the Yom Kippur War. And a lot of it was because they refused to, they were ordering the military to make moves that were suicidal and that were damaging to the security of Israel. That's why Ariel Sharon said, like, something like, oh, you know, he said something like, the military, listen to the military experts. Don't give, from your position in the government, don't tell a military expert what to do on the field, right? Because you're going to cause, you don't know what's going on there, right? So respect their opinion. And don't give orders when you're not yourself on the field seeing what's happening, right? So it reminded me of this what he said about these Civil War. I have to read about that, right? The Spanish Civil War, right? So back to okay, Mikhail Shambadal was active on the editorial staff of the Black Book as an editor and translator from Yiddish. M. Steinman, no biographical data known. Maria Shkapskaya Andreeva, from 1891, Petersburg, to 1952, Moscow, studied philosophy in Toulouse. She published her first poems in 1910, and in 1921, a first book of poems. Later, she worked as a journalist at the Leningrad newspaper, Red Evening newspaper, Vechernaya Krasnaya Gazeta. In 1942, her book about the atrocities of the German occupiers in the Soviet Union appeared. This really happened. Eto действительно no случилось. The censors heavily abridged her report. The Germans is Radziwiłło. In the Black Book, an anthology of her poems was published in London in 1979. Viktor Shklovsky, from 1893, St. Petersburg, to 1984, Moscow. He lived a long life, it looks like. Not long, but like relatively. He didn't die at 20, so yeah. Published in 1923, after studying philosophy and literature, his first novel, Sentimental Journey, Sentimental no Putchesvi, and worked after 1926 as a screenwriter and author of children's books. He was one of the most important literary scholars, authors, and critics of Soviet literature, and analyzed in his theoretical works, among others, the works of Tolstoy, Gogol, and Mayakovsky. Theory of Prose, Teoria Prosy, from 1984, is one of his main works. So, yeah, Lydia Saifulina, from 1889, Varlamovo, from 1954, Moscow. Author and playwright, Saifulina was a teacher by profession. In one of her first novels, The Runaways, Pravonarushiteli, she devoted herself to the problem of the Besprizorniki, the war orphans who went to seed during the Civil War. During the Second World War, she wrote articles for newspapers and several narratives, including in 1942, On One's Own Ground, Na Svoje Zemlje. She was also active in broadcasting. These people are like all pretty much accomplished in their own right, you know, it's wild. So, Hirsch Smoller, born in 1905 in Zembro, Poland, in his youth was active in the illegal Polish Communist Party. He fled to the Soviet Union and returned to Poland in 1929 to work in the communist underground. He was arrested and imprisoned for 4 years. Managed to escape in 1939 and reached Bialystok via the USSR. After the annexation of the Polish eastern districts, there he was, the editor of the Yiddish newspaper Białystok Stern, until 1941. During the German occupation, he was one of the leaders of the resistance movement in the ghetto of Minsk. At that time, he wrote the narrative From the Minsk Ghetto, Von Minsker Ghetto, which was published in Poland in 1946 and in Russian translation in 1947. After his escape from the ghetto, he commanded a Jewish partisan unit and helped to create additional partisan units. He returned to Poland in 1946, where he led the Jewish culture section at the CC of the Polish United Workers' Party and worked with the Yiddish language newspaper Volksstimme. In 1968, he was discharged by the communist rulers and emigrated to Israel in 1971, where he was active in academic and literary fields. He is also the author of the play The Soldier of Poshuti. Leib Strongin, from 1896 to 1968, worked from the age of 13 as a typesetter for printers. He joined the Communist Party in 1917 and printed illegal communist newspapers in Belarusia. Then he became press commissar and after 1924, chairman of the Belarusian State Publishing House. In 1939, he took over the management of the official Yiddish newspaper and publishing house, Der MS in Moscow. As successor to the executed Moshe Litvakov, Strongin was a member of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee and editor of the newspaper Einigkeit. He was arrested in 1949 and released after Stalin's death. Oh, lucky guy. Lucky bastard, right? He's one of the few that didn't die. Abram Suskever was part of the authors of the Black Book. Ilya Treinin, from 1887 to 1949, was a lawyer and member of the Academy of Sciences in the USSR. As chairman of the Academy's Institute of Law, he collected documents and materials about fascist crimes in the occupied areas of the Soviet Union. He was a member of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, as well as of the Extraordinary National Commission for discovering and investigating the evil deeds of the fascist German invaders and their accomplices with regard to the immense crimes of the German government. Osipi Czorny, born in 1899, was an author, art theorist, and director. Members of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee in May 1945. So, Mikol Salman, professor, folk artist, chairman, Epstein Shachne, secretary general, editor-in-chief of the newspaper Einigkeit. Okay, so here's all the lists of the people that were part of that committee, and that were all, it's like this is a long list of names. And then there's the members of the Presidium of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee of 1946. And it says all the sources where you can find the names of those who were dead, who were killed by Stalin, etc., right? Murdered Yiddish authors and publishers by Stalin, right? And here's a long list of names. Wow. Then there's Yiddish authors killed in action as Soviet soldiers. So it says all the names here listed. Let me try to make myself smaller so you can see the list. Right? Here's a list. Murdered Yiddish authors and publishers. Yiddish authors killed in action as Soviet soldiers. Yiddish authors repressed. What does repressed mean? Held back? Repressed. Repressed, restrained, inhibited, or repressed. Yeah. Oppressed. Okay. All these names. Hebrew authors murdered. Ooh. Al-Sadif, all these names, right? All these Jewish people that were murdered. There's at least here Hebrew authors that were murdered by Stalin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So you have like all these like typical Jewish names, you know, like Shlomo and Joseph and Zborowski and Chaim and Yitzchak and Israel and Abraham and Gershon and Ben Zion and Aaron and Moshe and Yitzchak and Yaakov. This is Jewish names, right? Typical. So it's funny because when I sometimes watch different podcasts on YouTube, right? Such as, what is the guy's name? What's his name? What's that guy's name? The Lebanese Jewish guy. I forget his name, right? But he says that what does he say? He says that, oh, you won't ever find anybody hijacking planes with the name of Abram and Yitzchak. You will never find rape gangs with the names of Shlomo and Shmuley. Like, that's not names that you'll find in the rape gangs. The rape gangs are the ones who are Islamic, with names like Abdullah and Al-Rashid or Al-Salah, these Arab names, right? Those are the people that do hijackings and that are part of the rape gangs. And so when people like to accuse the Jews of this grand conspiracy of causing all of the bad things happening in the world, and you point out, you say things like, oh, the guy who hijacked the planes on 9/11 was not Jewish, he was an Arab. It doesn't matter to them, right? They don't want to give responsibility of the crimes to the people that are actually the murderers and responsible. They want to indulge themselves in this grand conspiracy of Jews controlling everything and organizing the Arabs to hit the Twin Towers. Like, that's something that, instead of like looking at what's in front of them, as if like ignoring the problem that of who's actually doing what is going to help you in any way, you ignore it and you blame the Jews. In the end, they're going to come for you in your home, and it won't be the Jews coming to rape you. It will be Abdullah coming to rape you, right? And then we say, like, whatever, like, you asked for it, you know what I'm saying? Like, you chose to be ignorant and arrogant. You chose. And you say to these people, these Jew haters, you chose the way you wanted to go. You chose, instead of looking squarely at the bad guy in the face and acknowledging their responsibility and putting them in jail and dealing with the threat, you'd rather just, like, blame the Jews. But that's not going to help you. What's that guy's name who said that? What's his name? He's got on YouTube that speaks with Douglas Murray. I don't remember his name. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't remember his name. Yes, 100% sweetheart. Yes, exactly. So, okay, then there's the list of the Jewish generals. 305 Jewish generals and admirals served in the Red Army. 27 of them received the highest honors, right? So, like, people like to say, oh, the lunatics like to say, oh, the Jews are, who saved the Jews in the Holocaust? The white man. They like to say, if not for us, you guys would have all died in the Holocaust, right? Well, we did all die in the Holocaust. There were only a few survivors, and the white man is the one that killed us, not anybody else. It was the white man, right? And then they say, yeah, we liberated you from the camps. No, the Americans, a million black men served in the army, and they liberated the camps. There were thousands upon thousands of Jews who joined the military in World War II, in America and England, and in Russia, especially. Jews were the pioneers of raising money for the Soviet Union's war against Hitler, right? And they also took part in liberating the camps, right? And so there's so many stupid people in the world that it's just unbelievable. Yeah, so here's generals. These are just generals in the army, right? Admirals and generals. 305, and 27 of them received the highest honor. So here is the heroes of the Soviet Union. There's all these names, right? Yaakov, Leonti, Zivoni, Yefim, Shimon, right? The Jewish names. Lev, Boris, Yaakov, Shmuel. And then the last names are Stern, Grigory, Colonel General, Weinrob, Matvey, Lieutenant General. All the names of their rank, right? Yaakov, Mark, which could be Mordechai, right? Then you have here Jewish admirals, so all their names. Schindel, Daniel, right, is a Jewish name. Steinberg, Chaim, Genrich, David, Michael, Alexander, Oscar, Alexander is a Jewish name. It's also a non-Jewish name, but a lot of Jews use that name to name him after Alexander the Great. Nikolai, Grigory, Avraham, Anatoly, Avraham, heroes of socialist work, Yitzchak, Mikhail, Yitzchak again. They were rabbis, son of a rabbi and chief architect of the Soviet Air Force, people in the Air Force, right? And then there's the fallen that died in fighting the Nazis. Berezinski Lev, Major General from 1943, who died in the war. You have, is Raspberry looking for something? What are you looking for, baby? What's she looking for? What's under there? Something there? What? Am I missing something? Let me see what she's looking for. Oh, it's your bone. I see. Raspberry bone. I'm trying to get it, Raz. Here, let me get a pencil for you, Raspberry. I'll get the bone. It's just a little raspberry lost her bone. 1 second, let me see. Let me see. Come here. Let me see. I'm gonna try to get. Yay! Raspberry got her bone. Hooray, Raspberry! Raspberry got her bone. So happy for her. Raspberry got her bone. Major General Stelmach. Sources there. Here's the sources. Moscow number 5. I think it's from the archives of Moscow government archives, right? General Manfred Stern, founder of the Inter-Brigades, defender of Madrid, died in the Gulag. Ooh. Among those Jewish generals, intentionally forgotten by the Soviet historiographers, is Manfred Stern. Why? They wanted to forget that he was a general in the Soviet army, right? In no issue of the great Soviet encyclopedias is the name of one of the most famous generals of the Spanish Civil War mentioned. Why? Manfred Stern was born on January 20, 1896 in Woloka, near Chernowitz in Bukovina, as the son of a Jewish small farmer. He was drafted in 1914 and was sent to the Russian front. He was a not quite 20-year-old cadet of the Austrian army, and on August 31, 1916, he ended up as a Russian prisoner and was kept at the Chita camp near the Mongolian border. What? After the October Revolution in 1917, Stern was involved in putting together revolutionary units in Siberia that were made up of former prisoners of war who had been freed and fought on the side of the Bolsheviks. His superiors quickly recognized the exceptional military and organizational capabilities of the young Austrian officer. He became commissar of a partisan unit that operated behind the White Guard troops of Admiral Kolchak. In the summer of 1921, he fought in the Transbaikal region against the troops of the General Baron Ungern von Sternberg. In these battles, he was wounded many times. Shortly thereafter, Stern was promoted to the Chief of Staff of the Far East troops of the Red Army, who fought against the Japanese intervention troops and Czech legionnaires. From 1925 until 1926, he studied military science at the Frunze Military Academy in Moscow. Directly after that, he was Chief of Staff of a gunner regiment that was a part of the Moscow Proletarian Division, and later he was an employee of the Frunze Military Academy. During this time, he married Vera Krylova, and in 1926, his son Vilmar was born. He probably married a goy. Whatever. In 1931, Stern was accredited with the title of Soviet commercial attaché in New York. At that time, he managed to get the prototype of a new tank, including the construction documents that belonged with it, and had it smuggled into the Soviet Union with a shipload of Cadillacs. His next area of operations was China, where he often acted as the chief military advisor of the Comintern at the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. From Shanghai, the Communist Party directed the Central Soviet region in South China, in which Mao Zedong's long march into North China began. So this guy was like, he basically, it looks like he wasn't even a Russian, but he was, wait, is Chernowitz in Bukovina in Russia? No. Bukovina. Let's go see where that is. Bukovina. Bukovina. Where is this? It's in Switzerland. He's not even Russian. He's Swiss. So, apparently looks like, so he was a prisoner, but then the Russians used him to their advantage because he was brilliant. So they just forgot him because he was they just conveniently forgot him because he's not Russian. So, but he was Jewish and he was working for the Russians, right? After the Civil War broke out, the Moscow leadership sent the military expert of the World Revolution, Manfred Stern, this guy who is Austrian, to Spain. He arrived in Madrid on September 15, 1936. On the morning of November 7, the battle for Madrid began, which would decide the further destiny of the Republic. The defenders of Madrid also received support from armored units commanded by Soviet Jewish Colonel Krivoshein, and from Republican planes commanded by General Jacob Shmirchik Douglas, which broke the air supremacy of the fascists over Madrid. So he commanded the planes. Although the XI brigade was only made up of just 2,000 soldiers, it strengthened immensely the militias and the people's will to defend. As Stern arrived in Madrid with the first international brigade that he founded, he sent an appeal to the people that said, "We have come to help you defend your capital with the same dedication as if it were the capital of every one of us." On the night of November 9, the troops under the command of General Miaja and Stern, alias Kleber, succeeded in destroying the opponent at the Casa de Campo. It was clear at dawn in the morning of November 10 that Madrid had been saved. The XI brigade conquered the entire park up to the hills of the Garabitas, but had lost 1/3 of its fighters. Right, so General Kleber was celebrated as the savior of Madrid by all those native to Madrid and by the foreign correspondents who had remained in the city during the fighting. The polyglot peasant and dynamic 40-year-old general was a more interesting person to the media than his superior, General Miaja. Miaja was certainly bitter that Kleber harvested all of the laurels. So Kleber was an alias for what? Kleber was, I think it was his alias for Stern, right? The Jewish guy, Stern, right? So everybody's giving him attention, so they got the other guy, General Miaja, jealous of the Jewish guy, Stern, the Austrian guy, right? Okay, so the polyglot, pleasant and dynamic 40-year-old general was a more interesting person to the media than his superior, General Miaja. Miaja was certainly bitter that Stern, right, Kleber, harvested all the laurels. Although the majority of Madrid's defenders were Spaniards, exactly 1 month later, Stern, right, Kleber, I think that's his name, was relieved of his command. It is not to rule out that in the name of the Moscow cleansing, the sword of Damocles already hung over this charismatic Comintern functionary with Jewish heritage. Yeah, Stern. As his qualities were poor prerequisites to survive in the time of Stalin. So, because he was Jewish and he was a prisoner of war, but he was a hero, he had to be cleaned out. They had to let him go. And then probably got killed by Stalin. Let's see what happens to him. With a blink of an eye, the hero of the Spanish Civil War and defender of Madrid became an unperson. In October 1937, Stern was ordered back to Moscow because he had an idea of what was before him. He divorced his wife to protect her and his son from repressions. On July 23, 1938, he was arrested and delivered to the Lefortovo prison in one step. He was immediately subjected to brutal interrogations with torture and no sleep. He confessed to spying for Germany and to belonging to an anti-Soviet Trotskyite organization in Spain. At this time, the secret Russian police, the NKVD, General Jan Bursin, was also called from Spain and arrested in Moscow. He accused Stern of being a Trotskyite and was later shot as a spy himself. Of course, they'll admit to anything because you'll say anything under torture, right? In March 1939, Stern withdrew his self-accusations. The military staff of the Supreme Court sentenced Stern to 15 years in the Gulag for espionage on May 13, 1939. At the end of May 1939, he was brought by way of Vladivostok to Kolyma. It was the beginning of the tragedy, lasting 15 years. So he was like a really good guy because he knew he loved his wife, it looked like, and his child, so he divorced them to keep them safe. Wow. So they put him in the Gulag, right? Interventions and petitions by Manfred Stern's brothers, Wolf and Leo, as well as by numerous Comintern functionaries, were never answered. In June 1944, Stern asked in a letter to Stalin that he be permitted to actively take part in the war. This letter also remained unanswered. Seriously? In the war against Hitler, the guy is brilliant. You don't want him to fight. Like, Stalin was sick, right? This letter also remained unanswered. On November 26, 1945, Stern was sentenced to further 10 years in a special prison as a Trotskyite and a spy for supposed anti-Soviet agitation among the prisoners. Wow, because he's Jewish. You know, you get this bad treatment. In other words, as a dangerous criminal, the end of his imprisonment would have been on November 26, 1955. In October 1952, Stern again wrote to Stalin. In 20 pages, he described his life path and his accomplishments as a loyal Soviet citizen and communist, lamented his many years of undeserved imprisonment, and asked to be released. Stalin's going to kill him, right? Let's see what happens. Also without success. Less than 1 month later, on February 20, 1954, he supposedly died of cerebral hemorrhage. So he probably got... They killed him, but Stalin was already dead. Right? So we don't know what happened to him, but all we know is that he's dead, right? Like, we don't know how he died, what happened to him, right? But it's a really tragic story of somebody that just happened to just get into the hands of the wrong people, you know? Like, as a Jewish person, you're doomed. Do you know what I'm saying? You're a Jewish person with some power and some charm and with some power, some charm, some intelligence, and some attention people give you, you're doomed. Especially if you're living under Stalin, right? Hi, yo mama. They chose in hatred over being good, yeah. Sup. Right. General Boris Vannikov. It is thanks to General Boris Vannikov, among others, that the Soviet Union ended the war victoriously. These are Jewish generals in the Russian army. The Jewish general, however, counts as one of the least known and completely forgotten personalities of the Second World War today. He was born near Baku, as the son of a Jewish working-class family. After he finished school, he worked as a petroleum workman and participated in the Civil War in the Caucasus as a volunteer. After his studies at the technical schools in Baku, Tbilisi, and last at the Moscow Institute of Technology, he became the leading engineer and later director in the armaments industry. In 1937, he became deputy commissioner, and in 1939, commissioner for the armaments industry in the Soviet Union and member of the Central Committee until 1961. Together with Lazar Kaganovich, he was the only Jewish member of the government at this time. So it looks like he didn't get killed by Stalin, right? In 1941, a few months before the attack on the Soviet Union from Hitler, right, as he discovered that Stalin, without his knowledge, had stopped the production for armor-piercing weapons, he protested strongly. As a punishment for this insubordination, he was arrested at the beginning of June 1941. Still in jail, he worked out the evacuation plan for the armament industry. Only 3 weeks later, he was released because Stalin realized that the war would be lost without his Minister of Armaments, right, for the weapons, right? And also, another thing that I read about in this book was that there was another guy, it came in my mind and went, I don't remember what it was, right? Okay, Vannikov received orders from Stalin to evacuate the entire heavy industry, as well as the armament industry behind the Ural Mountains. And despite the heaviest bombardments from the German Luftwaffe, he managed to succeed completely. He was able to organize the forced production of tanks, artillery, and airplanes, which made the later victory possible. He was made lieutenant general in January 1944, and in November 1944 was promoted to general of technical services of the Red Army. Stalin knew how to acknowledge Vannikov's achievements. Upon his personal order, he was made Minister-in-Chief of the atom bomb project of the Soviet Union. Oh, yeah, sure. Right, yeah, sure. He was the one to receive the medal Hero of Socialist Work 3 times. In 1942, 1949, and 1954. Oh, he survived Stalin. Mazel tov. Very nice. Which was the name of the rank as the medal Hero of the Soviet Union. He also received the Lenin decoration 6 times, as well as the Suvorov and Kutuzov decorations. In 1958, despite the highest achievements, he was released from the governing gerontocrats. At only 61 years old, he died 3 years later and was buried. Okay, so he was released at 61 years old from whatever, the governing whatever. He died 3 years later and was buried at the wall of the Kremlin. Why? Why? Oh, why would he be buried at the wall of the Kremlin? Right, Raspberry? Why would they do that? Like, it's ridiculous. Ay, 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 ay. What a day. What a day. Continue on. Can't seem. The day goes by too fast and I don't get anything done. You know what I mean? Like, I'm really trying, but it's just really hard, you know? Like, So this should be an interesting story about this guy, the secret police general Alexander Orlov, Stalin's long arm in Spain, right? Let's go see if that's working. Okay, so among the more than 6,000 Jews who fought for the Spanish Republic, I don't understand what happened in this war. I don't know anything about it. The Spanish Civil War, right? There were many anti-fascists who were persecuted by Stalin's thugs. There were, however, also a few offenders. The most powerful and the most important of them, NKVD General Alexander Orlov, was the supreme chief of the Soviet Secret Service in Spain. Orlov, whose civil name was Lev Feldman, such a Jewish name, was born the son of a pious Jewish timber trader on August 21, 1895, in the White Russian Bobruisk. He was studying law in Moscow as he was summoned to the 104th Cavalry Regiment of the Tsarist Army in 1916. In 1917, he became a cadet in one of the officers' schools founded by the Kerensky government, and he left it as a lieutenant. During the Civil War, he was a commander of the counterintelligence service of the 12th Army, which fought against the Polish invasion in the Ukraine. He commanded a partisan unit, later on orders of the founder of the Cheka, Felix Dzerzhinsky. He led the counter-espionage in Archangelsk. In 1924, he began to work for the Secret Service, and later became commander of the border troops in Caucasus, with its headquarters in Tissus. In 1926, Orlov was able to succeed with several spectacular operations, disguised as a traveling salesman in France. From 1928, he coordinated and kept surveillance of secret weapons deals between the German army leadership and the Red Army. In April 1934, he traveled with an Austrian passport from Vienna to London, where he was successful with one of the greatest coups in the history of espionage, the recruitment and guiding of the agents Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, and Guy Burgess, who called themselves the Three Musketeers. Orlov was Stalin's master spy. A few days after the revolt, Franco agreed with the Politburo of the KPDSU to send Orlov to Spain as the chief of the secret Russian police, the NKVD. Why was he chosen in particular as the only Chekist in a high position? Orlov had not only had experience in counter-espionage, partisan warfare, and operations abroad, He also spoke several languages. He arrived in Madrid on September 16, 1936, and was greeted with a military and political chaos. As the Spanish government left Madrid at the beginning of November, he remained as one of the few officials in his headquarters. Spain would pay dearly for the Soviet aid that enabled the victory in the Battle of Madrid. Hundreds of Comintern agents and the secret police NKVD officers, on orders from Moscow and with Orlov in the lead, strove to take the Republic, its organs, and the army under Soviet control. All real potential political opponents were to be eliminated, either by arrest or intimidation. The hunt for supposed deviants, Trotskyites, anarchists, and other anti-fascists found its climax in May of 1937, as the FNT, FAI, and the POUM were forbidden, and the fighting regiment on the front were dissolved. Orlov smuggled secret police officers, Russian secret police officers, NKVD, into most units of the Spanish counterintelligence and into the military investigation service. His colleagues forged military documents to verify the supposed collaboration of the anarchists with the fascists. Because of these false accusations, many of those accused were kidnapped and killed. Among those was the leader of the POUM, Andres Nin. Orlov allowed his agents to act for themselves behind enemy lines. Oh. Wow. Spain also had to pay in concrete terms for the Soviet aid with gold. The Republic owned the fourth largest treasury of gold in the world. Really? Oh my god. Valued at $788 million, of which $155 million were used for purchases of weapons in the West. More than 510 tons were left over, valued at $633 million. According to today's value, $4.7 million or $10.4 million. DM, I don't know what that is. Because the Western powers practiced a strict embargo against the Republic in 1936, the Soviet Union was the only country in which the treasury of gold was securely kept and could serve as a deposit for the weapons delivery. Orlov received the order from Stalin himself to bring the treasury of gold under the strictest secrecy and divided up into 4 ships to the Soviet Union. Imagine if those ships sunk. How would they ever get those gold again, right? So they put it on 4 ships to the Soviet Union. The plan was to transport the gold through partially mountainous terrain to the heavily bombed marine base Cartagena, 500 kilometers away. The gold was to be temporarily stored in a cave not far from the harbor and loaded onto the ships. This sounds like some sort of like pirate play, like secret golden treasure in a cave. The most impossible was successful. They managed. On November 9, 1936, the ships arrived in Odessa. The gold was transported immediately to Moscow, and the treasure was counted and weighed for the next year. Not until 1938 did the Spanish government receive a receipt for more than 510 million something grams of gold. At the beginning of July 1938, so it looks like Russia stole the gold from the Spanish? Yeah, in return for Russians fighting for the Spanish for something against I don't know who. I'm not sure exactly what happened in this war. I don't know. I don't know anything about the Spanish Civil War. I literally know nothing about it. So, at the beginning of July 1938, General Orlov received the order from Moscow to drive immediately to Paris, and from there to Antwerp, where he was to take part in a conference on board the Soviet steamship Sver. At this time, hundreds of NKVD officers were being arrested and shot under Yezovshchina, the period when Yezov was the NKVD, the secret Russian police chief, and Orlov had a feeling that he too was to be liquidated on board the ship. His colleague in Spain, NKVD secret general police, General Abram Slutsky, former chief of foreign affairs, had been murdered in Moscow in February 1938. Instead of registering at the Soviet embassy in Paris, as he had been ordered to do, he was able to escape to Canada via Cherbourg with his wife and daughter. Oh my god. That's like a close escape because he knew. He's very smart, this guy, right? As Orlov disappeared, the Volks commissioner Yezov sent a secret police Russian killer troop out to find him. Orlov wrote 2 sealed letters addressed personally to Stalin and Yezov. which an American relative delivered to the Soviet embassy in Paris. In the letters, Orlov threatened to reveal his secret knowledge of Stalin's and the Yazov's crimes should anything happen to him, his wife and daughter, as well as his mother and mother-in-law still living in the Soviet Union. He surrendered to the FBI, and after 12 years of hiding, he published the book, The Secret History of Stalin's Crime. Oh, boy. Hey. Whew. The Secret History of Stalin's Crime. Ooh. History of Stalin's Crimes. Yes, let's go read the book. Written by Orlov. Yes? Yes, queens. Yes. Yes. Okay, where are we? In reality, however, he never revealed any significant secrets and only wrote that which he already knew, which was already known. His silence allowed the English spies he had recruited, Maclean and Burgess, to flee from England in May 1951. What? On April 6, 1953, 1 month after Stalin's death, Life magazine published the first of 4 extracts from Orlov's book. A better time could not have been chosen. This book became a bestseller. Okay, so it's basically knowledge that we already read in this book. So, like, I don't think we have to read that book. Or do we? Do we have to read it? I don't know. Right? Let's go see if it looks good. In the Internet Archive. Let's see if it's readable and if it actually, you know, if it looks good. I'm borrowing it and we'll see. Excuse me. Who's sending me mail? Okay, so telling you, these stories are wild. It's like just so like gripping. It's so oh. The Secret History of Stalin's Crimes. To the memory of our daughter Vera. His daughter died? Yay! It should be interesting, though, to read, because this is something that needs to be... Because I still feel like this book that I read here is not enough, right? Like, so where are we? Okay, so Orlov's colleague... It couldn't have been at a better time. Orlov's colleague... NKDW, General Walter Krivitsky, the chief of espionage for Europe, whose seat was in Holland, was also a turncoat. He had already published his book in Stalin's Secret Service in 1940 at Albert de Lange. What? Oh, really? Really? In Stalin's Secret Service, they're all writing books, you know? Good for them, right? So, the Amsterdam Publishing Company in exile. On February 11, 1941, Krivitsky was found shot to death in his Washington, D.C. hotel. Orlov, however, died in April 1973 of natural causes in Cleveland, Ohio, the only one of all the high-ranking refugees of Soviet espionage. Very good for him, right? But this guy got killed by, obviously, from... Okay, let's go see in Stalin's Secret Service. In Stalin's Secret Service. Let's go look for that. In Stalin's Secret Service. The guy, his name should be Walter Krivitsky. Yeah, that's the guy that was killed. That was the guy that was killed. Walter Krivitsky. That's right. That's right. Right. Yes. I don't even need to borrow it. I could just read it. Does it open? Like, what's with this? Ah. Okay, so there are people that actually live through this, you know what I'm saying? So this goes against all those, like, stupid history revisionists that are, like, are trying to defend Stalin and Hitler, like, lunatics, you know? Like, fucking psychos and lunatics, like, literally. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh my god. Okay, then there's significant publications about the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, right? So... let's see if this is anything of substance, which we can read. Hi, Christina. Look at my sweethearted and bloated little bumblebee. You're so sweet, Christina. I'm so flattered, right? Yeah. So, significant publication about the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. One of this book's main sources is the volume Nepravdny Zud Posledny Stalinsky Rastrel. Editor Professor Vladimir P. Nomo, Moscow, 1994, published by the Committee President of the Russian Federation for the Rehabilitation of the Victims of Political Persecution, and contains, apart from secondary abbreviations, the complete transcript of 1952 secret trial. The Black Tears of the Soviet Jury, Boston, Toronto, 1971, by Yehoshua Gilbo, is one of the early standard works about the history of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. Born in Poland, the author spent 8 years in the Soviet Gulag, then became an editor. There's a lot of books you can read on this, right? In the Israeli newspaper Maariv, and invited by Professor Erlich Goldhagen, worked in many American archives where he analyzed with great accuracy the tragic destiny of the Soviet Jews between 1939 and 1953. Professor Shimon Redlich of the Ben Gurion University in Beersheba wrote the first detailed history of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee with his book, Propaganda and Nationalism in Wartime Russia, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee in the USSR, from 1941 to 1948. Boulder, Colorado, 1982, a native of Poland. He researched in over 20 archives and interviewed many contemporaries. Only a few are still alive today. The bibliography of his book contains 150 titles. The book, Holocaust and Stalinism, a documented study of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee in the USSR, Luxembourg, 1995, published by Shimon Redlich, was compiled by Israeli and Russian researchers and published by the Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, the State Archives of the Russian Federation, and the Yad Vashem Institute. The publication is over 500 pages and contains, besides many other studies, 181 official and very extensive documents from the former Soviet Union state archives, inaccessible until then. A critical apparatus and short biographies. This publication is the essential and standard reference book on this subject. Very nice. Holocaust and Stalinism. Wow. There's lots of books you can read on this subject. Right? Okay, Stalin's War Against the Jews. I have that already bookmarked. The Doctor's Plot and the Soviet Solution. It's a lot of books to read. It's based on English sources and conversations with contemporaries. So it just talks about different sources that you can go and read about this stuff. Gennady Kostryachenk's book, Imprisoned by the Red Pharaoh. You lost something, Raspberry? Did you lose something again? Did you lose something again? This is a little water, the Raspberry. Raspberry. So it's basically saying all the sources here. You can see for yourself. Hidden Secrets in New York, as Stalin Against Jews, Vaspersky-Vyshechinsky's biography, and the book Soviet Mafia were translated into several languages. That should be interesting, Soviet Mafia, right? In 1993, Rowolt Verlag published Stalin's persecutees from the KGB's dungeons. Die Verfolgten Stalins aus den Verließen des KGB. Yeah, so, like, wow. Wow. Right, so, right, I'm basically like skimming through it. Alexander Porchkovsky is the only author himself a victim of persecution of the Jews by Stalin. The well-known playwright and novelist was born in 1913 in the Ukraine and is living in Moscow since 1938. He is one of the 7 drama critics who were denounced as anti-Soviet ruthless cosmopolitans in the Pravda of January 28, 1949. In his book, The Blood is Accused, a documentary novel of Vinastsia Krov, Dokumentalnaya Povest, Moscow, 1994, Borchagovsky analysis, inquiry, and court files, which were first accessible in the 90s, as well as voluminous sources already in 1995, a French translation titled Le Holocauste inachèvé, où comment Stalin tenta d'éliminer les Juifs de URSS exists. Okay, so there's a lot of books, basically. Stalin's Persecution of the Jews, Die Juden Verfolgung under Stalin, was published in Berlin 1997. Shmirchik. Kohn Shmirchik. Almost sounds like my name. Shmirchik. Author of many essays and books about the history of the Soviet and East European Jews, is the most important historian. Oh, and bibliographer of Jewish Soviet literature and press. Very nice. His unique reverence both Jewish publications in the Soviet Union, Persumim Yehudim Bevrit Hamaotzot, 1917 to 1960, includes 3,482 titles of Yiddish books and other publications, 400 newspapers and other periodical titles, and 148 titles of publications in Russian language. Shmirchik also published the anthology A Spiegel auf a Stein. The anthology is more than 800 pages and includes the works of 12 murdered Jewish poets and authors: Axelrod, Bergelsen, Charik, Der Nister, Pfeiffer, Halkin, Hofstein, Kolbach, Kushnirov, Kvitko, Markish, and Pursov. Pekar's medal honors the life and works of the aforesaid, except Charik and Kolbach, who were already killed in 1937 and 1940. Professor Shmirchik died in July 1997 in Warsaw. Under the leadership of the Israeli historian Benjamin Pinchas, all Soviet press articles of the Black Years from 1948 to 1953 were published in 7 large anthologies as a facsimile reprint, The Jews and the Jewish People. Right, so there's a lot of sources here that you can go read. Matthias Vetter is one of the few German historians who researched the anti-Semitic attitudes of the Bolshevik Party and of Stalin toward the Jews. So this is objective. A goy is doing the research, so you can trust it, right? Because it's a goy. His book, a doctoral thesis, Antisemitismus and the Bolsheviki, zum Verhaltnis von Sowjetsystem and Judenfeindschaft, from 1917 to 1939, Berlin, 1995, contains a wealth of materials on the subject. I owe him the translation of many important and still unknown documents. Roman Brackman belongs to the group of Jewish historians and victims of Stalinist persecutions. Like Alexander Borchagovsky, see Brackman's biography at the end of the introduction to the present book. In this book, The Secret File of Joseph Stalin, A Hidden Life, London, 2002. He reveals unknown facts in the biography of Stalin as an informer and spy of the Tsar's secret police. Really? Really? The Secret File of Joseph Stalin. Oh. The Secret File of Joseph Stalin. What's the next thing? The Secret File of A Hidden Life. A Hidden Life. Hidden Life. Oh, secrets. We love secrets. 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 We'll learn how freaky he was, probably. Oh, it doesn't let me borrow it. What a freak. Freak. He belongs in a circus. You freak. 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 Let's see if we can get it in the document. Right? Freak. Maybe I can get it in my Kindle. It must be a good book if it's unavailable. Or it's like recently written, so then we have to... They don't have it on the shelves, right? For free. So, keep that here. I'll have to do my research on where to find it. I can find it on... They have it on Amazon, so I can use it for my Kindle. Let's see what else there is. You see, so this is a treasure trove of stuff that is very interesting. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want to know all the secrets of the freaks and the creeps and the fascists, the tyrants, right? So, besides the authors mentioned, several Israelis and Russian historians and scientists from other countries have written further studies that were partially published in historical magazines. To these belong Mordechai Altschuler, Abraham Greenbaum, Dov Levin, Matisyahu Mintz, Shmuel Spector, Sima Yakias, Yakikas from Israel, as well as Ilya Altman, Brunzet Cholvoy, Boris Khazanov, Vadim Dubsin from Moscow, and Andrei Sakharov supported this research during his lifetime. Okay, let's see. We're almost done, I think. Archives and journals. Thanks to the Soviet bureaucracy, millions of documents have been carefully archived and can be researched since the opening of the archives. The notes Chranet Vechno and Sovercheno Sokrentno, keep forever, and top secret, are written or printed on the upper edge of most of the documents. Right. So anybody that's saying that all that is written in this book is a lie, you can go to the Soviet Union, to Russia, and you can go look in their archives yourself. You don't have to trust anybody writing this book. Go there yourself and request it and go look for it, or you can just trust the people that actually looked through it and have revealed it to you, right? And wrote it, and it's all corroborated and collaborated, right? After the sudden liquidation of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee in November 21, 1948, the large archives of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee of the newspaper Einigkeit of the ISPA press agency, especially material about their contacts with foreign countries and documents that were confiscated during the search of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee's members' houses, were transported to the warehouses of the Ministry of State Security. There they were arranged by the secret trail and archived again. Because of this material, besides the main indicted individuals, many other persons, among other things, in the provinces were arrested. In 1956, most of the material, among other things, 1,294 volumes of files of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, was transported to the Central Archives of the October Revolution. Today, State Archives of the Russian Federation, Gosudarstveniy Archive, Rossiyskoj Federalny. More documents are at the Rossiyskoj Zentor Kranenija I Isuchenia Dokumentov Ne Noveshe Istory, Russian Center for Storage and Study of Documents of the Recent History. The former archives of the Institute for Marxism-Leninism at the ZK of the KPDSU, a 14-page long and well-founded essay from Vadim Dubsin in the magazine JJTSU, the 16th, 1991. 3 gives information about the size of the archives of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee and about the broad spectrum of activities of the committee during the 6 years of its existence. More than thousands of volumes of files concerning the history of the Soviet Jews, as well as the confiscated archives of many Jewish organizations, among them the archives of 20 Jewish parishes, are stored at the Central Historical State Archives of the Ukraine. Oh, so the Ukraine has it. Because I would think that, like, why would Russia want to let people know about this stuff? You know what I mean? Like, Centralny Державny Historichetsky Archiv Ukrainy in Kiev. Other archives are, albeit not as large as in Moscow or Kiev, in the state archives of other former Soviet republics. Dr. Yitzchak Arad, the former director of Yad Vashem, and Dr. Shmuley Krakovsky, chief archivist of this institute, have collected and researched material about the destiny of the Soviet Jews for centuries. Since the opening of the archives, both traveled to the former Soviet Union for several times and cited 1.5 million of file sheets, thousands and thousands of copies concerning the persecution of the Jews in the Soviet Union, the Jewish Resistance and the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, but also the Jewish archive of Ilya Ehrenberg, were cataloged in Jerusalem and can be researched now. Yad Vashem also published an incomplete version of the Schwarzbuch in Russian, Yiddish, English, and Hebraic language, and a collection of hitherto unpublished subscriptions for the Russian original manuscript of the unknown Black Book, Schwarzbuch, Nezwestnaja, Tskurnaja Kniga, published by Arad, Pavlova, Altman, Krakovsky, Spector, and others, Moscow and Jerusalem, 1993. In the same year, Yad Vashem published a selection of letters from Soviet Jews to Ilya Ehrenberg. Altshuler, Arad, Krakovsky, publisher Soviet Jews write to Ilya Ehrenberg. So there's a book written about that, right? Together with the archives of Yad Vashem, this documentation builds a solid basis for serious proceeding research that will collect many history books. That will correct many history books. For several years, scientific magazines have published studies about the Soviet Jews, Soviet Jewish affairs, London, Jews and Jewish topics in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Jerusalem, which had been titled Jews in Eastern Europe since 1992, belonged to it since 1973. Shvut Yachtot Brit Hama Natsot Vemisrach Europa is published in Tel Aviv. The JWC publishes the magazines Behinot Yehudei Brit Hamoatzot Vemisrach Europa in Tel Aviv. In Jerusalem, the yearbook Yehudi Brit Hamoatzot Alija Wemetoak is published. The 1961 founded official Yiddish Soviet literary magazine Svietish Heimland is publishing many more memorial articles about the murdered Yiddish writer since the 60s. In 1993, this flagship of the official Yiddish pro-Soviet circles was stopped and substituted for the magazine Die Jiddische Gas, whose 200 pages long edition from February 1993 was dedicated to the murdered writers. The thing is that, even if the Jews of Russia were not allowed to speak Yiddish and the Jewish language was crushed, right? The Yiddish language was crushed. If the Holocaust hadn't happened, I don't think that it would have made too much of a difference, because the rest of the European Jews would have kept the Yiddish culture alive, like literally with the theater and all the literature and all that. But it so happened that the Holocaust decimated the Yiddish culture, and Stalin did a very good job in also crushing Jewish culture, Judaism, Jewish culture, Jewish nationalism, Jewish literature, right? Anything Jewish, right? And he used them to his own benefit, and then he killed them, right? And so, it's very sad, because Alan Dershowitz is right when he says that Yiddish culture is forever lost. Even though there are Jews who still speak Yiddish, but they are not into writing literature and making theaters and poetry and all that. They're just living as religious Jews somewhere in Williamsburg, right? So here's all the evidence, all these, where you go to the source, right? Right? It's all written here, and here you can go see for yourself, right? Right, so here, part 1, History of the Jews. Here's the notes. Around 1900, the Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews were estimated to total 10.5 million persons, 3.9 million of whom in Russia, excluding Poland. And then it says the source, right? And it's a lot of information here. Right? So this is very important stuff. Part 2, Janus faced liberation. The Jewish ascent after the October Revolution. All that stuff, right? So a lot of the sources where he got all his information, or you can go look for it yourself. Prehistory and Foundation of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. Where to find it. And with this, my friends, we actually, after 19 parts of trying to read this book, we actually finished the book, I think. We actually managed to finish it. I'm so proud, because this was not easy read. This was not an easy book to read. It was not an easy book to read. Right? Part 7, the trial. And all the sources for that. Yeah, these are important information. The index, and this guy himself that wrote this book himself was a survivor of Stalin. He was sent to the Gulag by Stalin, right? And so he knows this stuff, even though this is like a very factual book where it says exactly what happened to these people, it doesn't go in depth to the actual, like there's some books that are like really, if you go look in Stalin's biography, it will talk about everyday life, stories of the life, right? Different experiences. But here it's just very factual, right? Right, so I'm determined to get to the end of this book, and then we can call it a day. Right? Yeah, that's the end, my friend. We did this. Okay, so Arno Lustiger, the guy who wrote this book, I don't know if you can see his picture, right? This guy, he looks so Russian, of course. He was born in Poland. No, he's Polish actually, so he looks European. Interesting. In 1924, born in Poland, he survived the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Okay, so he didn't go to the Gulag. He was just in the Buchenwald, or maybe he did. I don't know. Since 1945, he had lived in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, as an independent author and publisher. He is co-founder of the local Jewish congregation and honorary chairman of the Zionist organization in Germany. He still lives in Germany. Wow. His publications include in German Shalom, Libertad, The Jews in the Civil War in Spain. Oh. To the life and death struggle about the resistance of the Jews of 1033 to 1045. He's also the editor of the German edition of the Black Book. Wow, The Genocide of the Soviet Jews by Vasily Grossman and Ilya Ehrenberg. So he didn't go to the Gulag, but he's an Holocaust survivor, right? In Poland, in Auschwitz, in the Buchenwald, the worst concentration camp ever. He actually survived it, right? He probably wrote a book about his own struggle surviving, right? So if we go look at his books, we probably could find, so we have to throw a party since we finished all 500 pages of the book, right? Arno Lustiger's book cannot be compared to any other on this subject. His knowledge includes everything that has been published until now, and from that material he reaches a new interpretation. More importantly, he has thoroughly mastered all the languages that are required to read the documents. Wow. So Russian, Polish, German, Yiddish, English, Hebrew, French. That's 7 languages. His book may finally compel the reader in the West to understand how the crimes Soviet communism committed against the Jews represented a different kind of Shoah, a different kind of Holocaust. 2 million Volga Germans, hundreds of thousands of Crimean Tatars, Chechens, and English had already been transported to Siberia. Why shouldn't the same be done with the Jews? Exactly. The Jewish doctor's plot, fabricated by the secret police, who supposedly wanted to poison the leadership of the party and of the entire state government, would have provided a perfect excuse to set in motion the Soviet version of the final solution. Right, but then Stalin died on March 5th, 1953. The Jews of the Soviet Union were temporarily saved. Temporarily. So with that, we're done. We're finished. We read the whole book, my friends. We read it. We, as in me, and whoever participated. Right? I'm so proud. Right? Yeah, so we did it, my friends. We did it. We did it. Wow, I'm so proud. And with that, it should feel really good, I should really throw a party of some sort, because, I should throw a party because we literally finished the book, 500 pages. Let's go see for fun how long it took me. Shall we? Should we go see for fun how long it actually took me? Right, okay, let's go to the, my channel, and let's go see how long it took me. I'll make myself smaller. Because last time I read a book, it took me 6 months. Because every time I'm reading it out loud, so every time it's basically, okay, let's go to part 12, Stalin the Jews. Part 11, part 10, we're almost there. Stalin the Jews, part 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, 3 weeks. Not bad. It took us 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago. So basically less than a month. Okay. Wow, that feels really good. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's an accomplishment. Do you know what I mean? So now we're free to go read anything else we want, and I can focus maybe on my other channels, like Shmirchik book reading, Shmirchik Tipsy Tarot, like Shmirchik Tipsy Tarot, and I have a channel on Rumble. So this is, because the last time, when was it that I felt, it was when I read on my other channel, the book of Moshe Dayan, and it was like really hard also to read. It was like 300 pages, 400, something like that, and we finished it in like 6 months or 7 months. And after I finished that book, I felt really good. So now I'm trying to see if that same feeling of satisfaction of working really hard and reading a book is going to feel the same. And at the same time, I'm reading the book of Ariel Sharon on Kindle. Yeah. Right here. I'm almost done this. I'm like 50% through. 50% through. Right? I'm up to page 343. So I'm reading lots of stuff. I just have to figure out, like, what's more important to read, you know? Like, I don't want to read stuff that... I want to read factual information, which is... You know what I'm saying? Which is important to know. Like history and philosophy and the different people that lived and the different stories that happened. And then we can, you know, keep learning, right? Anyway. Yes, queens. Yes, queens. So feel free to subscribe. I have, on Rumble, I have Shmirchik. I can show you here. I'm doing live at the same time on Shmirchik on Rumble. Where are we? Here. Shmirchik on Rumble. I have Shmirchik Tipsy Tarot, Shmirchik book reading, and oops, what am I doing? And yeah. So what's the next book we're gonna read? What are we gonna read? What's the next book that we need to read? I'm not done on this subject. I'm not done. There's so much more. We have to read about Lenin. We have to read about... We still need to read about Stalin's biography. We have to read about Lenin. We have to read also, because my father said that Lenin was just as bad as Stalin. They're all the same. So I want to understand that, right? Because the more information you know, the better it's for you, right? And then I want to read about the Spanish Civil War, what happened there. And then I want to read about what happens before then. The English-British literature. We're reading The Mad Woman in the Attic. We have so many things to read besides for what the Christians did to the Jews. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay, so with that, my friends. Yeah. What's happening today in Israel, right? It's just very... I don't know what's going on here. Poor kid. Poor kid. The guy is basically being released from captivity. And, wow, whatever. Anyway, feel free to subscribe, not subscribe, feel free to like, not to like, and that's that, my friends. And this, my friends, is what the channel is really about. My channel is really about learning. So regardless of how many subscribers there are, regardless of the audience, even though I do appreciate the 1 or 2 people like John and Christina, who likes to come on sometimes, and whoever else likes to hang out and actually engage in conversation, right? Productive conversation. This is why I made my channel, so that it can help me read and engage in my mind, because when I read alone, it's a little bit harder to read by myself and to hold my own concentration, right? So in a way, this helps me to read more on my own. So like today, I've been reading other books on the Kindle and on here as well. So it's just really magical, this internet thing. And that's that. Anyway, have a great day. And that's that, right? Thanks, John. Okay. Yeah. Bye. 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 Bye.